Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Stephen.
Hey Sam, hey Debbie.
So, Stephen, one of your focus areas is psychogeography. Can you tell us a little bit more about the area of research and what sparked your interest in the field?
My interest in the field, how did that come? I don't know. I sometimes I feel as if it was a certain age where I became interested in the kind of the places around me and the things that they had seen. Um, I've often wondered what sparked that interest, and I think it was really walking. Walking is always a big part of psychogeography because that's how psychogeographers of the past and its forebears have engaged with place and started to think about the psychological and emotional impacts of particular places, which is essentially what psychogeography is. Um, from there, and I began by I live very close to South Road, which is that long abomination that runs through us, and I decided that I would love it, that I would learn to love South Road. So I started walking down South Road and wrote a series of essays about it for the Adelaide Review. This is going back a while, and started to think about walking in particular. That whole idea of walking as engaging with place has a long history in many cultures, and it sets up a certain rhythm. It's a physical. It's a way of engaging with place physically. As I said, you set up a certain pace. There's a rhythm to that, and a rhythm that goes with writing. And a lot of psychogeography comes out of literature as well. At least there's sort of a history of people having written about that. Um, and it just spun off from there, really. And people who work I mean, psychogeography is a kind of a loose field with a few different strands, and people have approached it quite differently. And I became interested in the idea of place, and increasingly not just that we have connections to place, but that maybe that places have connections to us, that maybe places hold a memory as well. And that it sort of ties in with Aboriginal ideas of country, where law and stories reside in place. They're not something that people necessarily bring to that place. So it's a kind of it's just another way of thinking about non-human forms, life and non-life forms, and roads like South Road.
A very non-human road, South Road.
Inhuman.
Yes, inhuman. Yes. And how do you think psychogeography relates to well-being?
It doesn't necessarily relate to well-being because some places will produce a particular response that might seem adverse to one's well-being. We talked a bit about the idea of traumascapes. That there are the idea that places, the idea that places can retain psychological scars, that they have a memory of things that have happened before, and that you might find yourself in a place that gives you an uneasy feeling. All of these things, that they can be a work of the imagination. If you know that something has happened in a place, then of course you get that feeling because you can sort of reimagine and relive those sorts of things that have happened. But the idea that places also have a memory, that there are memories, that places hold those memories that impact on you. That impact might not be great for your well-being. But in terms of, say, the Aboriginal ideas of country and caring for country, that is an essential part of well-being, of people's well-being. You're caring for country, you're following the laws of that country because the country is part of who you are and is essential to your well-being. Caring for country in those instances is not just is a chore, it's something you have to do for your own physical and psychological and emotional health. So that's not so much psychogeography. Psychogeography is not about well-being in itself, but obviously places can give you a positive sense. And as I said, walking walking through these places is good for well-being because it's a way of engaging with place. It's a way of feeling your own body in this physical environment. It's a way of feeling your heartbeat, as well as being good for you going for a stroll physically. That didn't answer your question, so maybe try asking me another one that I can.
I think like what you've been saying, we've gotten into so many of these concepts, some of them being nostalgia and happiness you feel as a certain part of place. And there's the opposite with feeling that trauma. And I can definitely relate to going to places and having a specific feeling evoked immediately. But it does sound extremely complex, and it seems like it would be a very difficult thing to navigate in terms of research. So, what do you think? What have you found to be the most challenging aspect of this research?
I think it's to call it research is probably overstating it a little bit. For me, it's just a kind of it's something that I now think about when I've used it in research and I've used it in teaching. It is much more about developing a heightened awareness of place, of getting people to walk through Adelaide, for example, through the CBD, and getting even just paying closer attention to the topography of Adelaide. I mean, Adelaide is famously flat, except that when you look at it, it's not kind of flat at all. Where I am, where Mod is, when people are at Mod, it's just at the bottom, getting into the bottom of a bit of a dip from West Terrace that rises again up there to King William, and even just thinking about that as you're walking, suddenly the whole place changes, and you can start to imagine the place before the city, before they got asphalted and cemented over, and you get a stronger sense of how that topography ties in with rivers and the streams that would have flowed through there, and why Adelaide is built where it is, and that's because it was a raised bit of ground away from floodwaters, and it was used as a site for a city for the same reason that it was really important for the Kaurna people. It had an outlook, it had water, and it was a safe place from winter floods. So for me, psychogeography was a kind of a connection to thinking about place in a whole range of ways that also allowed for the idea that place itself has, as I said, holds memory, which is only a ridiculous idea if you're looking at it through some sort of scientific, humanist, patriarchal framework. There are many other cultural viewpoints that where that is a given. It's understood that places have this innate power in them, and psychogeography also comes from really just an interest in literature. It's an area that's been explored a lot in, especially in London, as psychogeography is very associated with English writers. And it wasn't called psychogeography back then, but William Blake, Thomas de Quincey, people who were very interested in urban exploration at that time, and trying to think about ley lines, kind of mystical lines that connected various points of the landscape, points on which churches had been built. Anyway, it introduces a kind of a spiritual network potentially.
And in terms of specific places and community engagement and being in place with other people, maybe you could tell us a bit about your discoveries around informal learning sites and community arts and music centres.
Yeah, I mean, whether that shades away from psychogeography, I've always, like, since I was a teenager, I've always, and continue to play in bands and play in music. So I was interested in the idea of music scenes and in small, in venues, and how important those places were for me, growing up, and continue to be as kind of cultural hubs. That and in terms of informal learning, that was much more with in the research I did then, that was much more to do with virtual environments. Really, it was thinking about how middle school students used LAN cafes back in those days, and various online environments and games, and how those things were an important part of their informal education. And they were the sorts of things that educators would say, "Oh God, I wish we could be so engaging." And there are also quite a few NAF responses to that, where you invent an educational game and pretend that it was as exciting as, Grand Theft Auto or something. Because the idea of once people are in a game, there are rewards, various psychological rewards that come with that. Getting to the end, getting various cookies and things along the way, whatever it is that drives people to want to play a game, to get to the end, to engage with that. So sort of quite different from psychogeography. I could probably try and, make a connection, but
No, I love what you're saying, because I've been spending a lot of time in our Minecraft world as with my background. And so it's really important for me to try and make a space that fosters those positive emotions that we might be missing out on during isolation. So the more I know about how that works, the better. It sounds like what you've been doing is a lot of implementing this thought process into various places, such as your teaching. But what else are you working on in this space, specifically around that psychogeography and trying to implement it?
Well, because I'm now my current role is program director of the Bachelor of Contemporary Art at the South Australian School of Art. What's now there's been a restructure at the University of South Australia. It's called UniSA Creative, that brings together a whole range of essentially creative programs, from music and performing arts and creative writing to contemporary art. And it's based in the city. And I've been trying in some courses to get students out and about to think of the CBD, its various cultural institutions, but also its cultural roots like North Terrace and everything else, to use that as a kind of a teaching tool. So it connects in a way what I was saying with psychogeography, because it's getting people physically out in those spaces and trying to get people to pay closer attention to the things that you would generally just walk past every day. A bit like I was saying about the topography of Adelaide, just to start to look at that and think about that and imagine that before the city, or maybe even have a future, imagination of those places. I'm a horror fan, and I'm really interested in zombies and post-apocalyptic scenarios. So again, a game I play while I'm idly wandering the city is which buildings I'd like to take over in the event of a zombie apocalypse. Which ones would be great. So just to get to think about the city in a different way, in a speculative way, as well as an imagined historical way, to think about what various monuments around the city say about our history, say about our present, what's missing. That's usually an easy one. It's women and people of colour. Not too many statues around of other than, I guess it's changing. It is changing, but for a long time it was just white male explorers pointing at things. And they're the things that we don't pay attention to. How often have we read the inscription on the Boer War monument on North Terrace and thought about that, thought about what the Boer War was. Among other things, it was where the first concentration camps were kind of invented and developed. There's a whole lot of, this is getting away from wellbeing but I think thinking critically about those things is good for you. It is good for you to be able to pull apart the world around you. So that's how I've used that in a way. We take students outside to sort of explore those things. Take students to, say, the West Terrace Cemetery, where we get them to engage with those places, to respond in different ways. whether it's recording sounds or taking rubbings from monuments with permission. We do get permission. We don't break anything. So, it's really important to me to actually engage with place. Some of that comes from ideas of thing called public pedagogies, which is essentially that. It's looking at the environment as a kind of a learning resource that hopefully continues, lifelong, beyond the university.
Well, speaking of continuation, what's next for you? What's your next focus?
My focus at the moment is getting through COVID-19 and getting through isolation, is getting courses up and running again. A lot of our courses are studio-based courses that we've had to reschedule, and that now we have to, for the better overall, I think, reimagine how we mix studio, hands-on teaching with online and off-campus sort of activities. A big focus of the Bachelor of Contemporary Art has always been learning with your hands. It's that haptic learning, engaging with materials, not just to learn how to use that material, because it changes the way you think. With handling a piece of wood or a slab of ink or whatever else you're using changes. I think it changes the way you think about yourself and the world and what you can do with those things. So that's been difficult because people have not been on campus. We've had to do a lot of Zoom meetings, and that in some places is kind of potentially better, but we have to find a mix of that. So for me, that's what it is. It's a challenge. I'm finding it interesting, alternately interesting and overwhelming.
Well, I'm sure there's people out there, including us, who are finding it interesting as well. And if people are interested and want to find out more about the creative arts or psychogeography, where would you suggest that people look?
They should probably enrol in the Bachelor of Contemporary Art and talk to me there. They should look. They should go. I don't know where they should look. They should go and speak to you at Mod, and you should when you're back on Mod, and you should direct them across the road to us. Galleries, and go for a walk. Pay close attention to what you're doing.
This has all been really, really interesting. We already started to chat a little bit when we had our tech issues, but sadly, that is all we can ask of you today. So thank you so much for talking to us today, Stephen. We really, really appreciate you coming and joining our program this afternoon.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Sam. See ya.